Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. As you guys can see, we are in the shop today, and today we'll be working on the Corvette that's still unfortunately stuck on the lift. And basically what we're doing today is basically doing the front end stuff. So drilling the crank, pinning it, putting the ARP bolt in for the final time. We're going to put the air conditioner, accessory drive, all that stuff down there. And I might put the water pump on. I'm not sure about the power steering or the alternator just yet. I've got some stuff still to do in the Valvetrain, but definitely the bottom end stuff. So, alright guys, I know you really can't see a difference, but we did pin the crank. It is pinned twice. I also have the ARP bolt. Torque that down to 235 foot-pounds, and we use the ARP assembly lube that they tell you to use. So, you know, I have a really old pin kit. You guys can actually see that right there. It might be time to replace that because that's the third or fourth crank that I've pinned. As you can see, I have the air conditioner bracket as well as the AC condenser that's installed right there. And from my previous install like a month ago, what I did was I took the AC bracket. I had every extra bolt that I had. They're all a 15 millimeter. I bolted them all in, and I got the perimeter not tight, but just, you know, loosely fitting on there so it's up against the block. I took the short bolt that comes with the AC bracket, bolted that in, torqued it down, and then when I later put the air compressor on there, everything lined up perfectly. Hard lesson learned from when I did this previously, but like I said, when you're tightening that bracket down, you want to make sure it's straight because it can be off kilter and it won't go on. So, and you'll struggle because that air compressor is heavy. But yeah, so like I said, put all the bolts in the perimeter, tighten down the center bolt, take all those perimeter bolts out, and then lift up the compressor and slide the bolts through and then tighten it down. So that's the easiest way to do that. So what we're gonna do next is the harmonic balancer and then the water pump. For the harmonic balancer, I actually do have an update for you guys. So last time I did this, I actually stripped out a couple of the bolts, and then I saw that ATI actually offered titanium bolts to hold the harmonic balancer to the hub. So this is part number ATI 950220T. Now unfortunately they only come with 6 and you need 9, something like that, yeah. And so with this install you need 9 of these, so I ended up buying 2 of these kits. I want to say it was like 20 bucks each. So I'll have a couple titanium bolts left over when we're done. No bigger deal, I'm sure we can find a use for it later. And kind of the trick with a harmonic balancer is there is a dot here, and there's also a dot on the hub over on the car, and you basically want to line that up. I don't know why that's offset. Maybe it's a balance issue or whatnot. So, alright guys, as you can see, we have the harmonic balancer is installed back on the hub. We got the titanium bolts. I torqued everything down to 16 foot-pounds and used blue Loctite on it. You guys can also see the AC compressor is down over here. So yeah, we are officially done on the bottom half of the engine. We still have to do the subframe lines, electrical and all that, but all the hardware that needs to go back on the motor is done. Alright guys, you can see I got the water pump on here. This torques down to 22 foot-pounds. I did replace the water pump gaskets, even though it literally ran for about 5 seconds. I think those are kind of a compression fitting, and once you squeeze them tight, you can't reuse them. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's true. So we got the lift plate off, and I swapped in the LS3 valley cover. You'll see I did plug in the oil pressure sensor in the back. We got the rear coolant ports. Those bolts are nice and tight. They're not falling down in the motor. And the front ones I also installed as well. These are those AN fittings. So as you guys can see on the passenger side, we have the Comp Cam's shaft mounted rocker system, and I have fully installed that. So basically what I did was I took our push rods that we just got in from Tick Performance, and these push rods that ended up being 7.600 in length. As I mentioned in the previous video measuring the push rods, it was 7.605. Well, no one makes a 0.005 of a pushrod length difference. So these were on the shelf ready to go, and the lifters from Johnson, they call for plus or minus 0.005. So, you know, we're a little short. We're at 7.605, but we're within spec of the Johnson lifter. But you also have to make your comp cam's rocker arms and the lifters, you know, be in sync. So the rocker arms actually call between 0.02 and 0.08 of preload, and the Johnson lifters call for 0.03 of preload. So we are within spec on the Johnson. We are within spec on the comp cam's roller rockers. I did kind of want to reiterate that. Basically, the only other thing that comp cam's wanting to do that was specific in the instructions was, when you tighten it down, make sure that cylinder is on its base circle. So the intake valve and the exhaust valve have to be on their base circles when you tighten it down. So not too big of a deal. And basically just turn it over until the exhaust valve started to open. Then I tightened down the intake because the intake's on base. You know, so I kind of just did it one cylinder, one rocker arm at a time. All of the push rods are in. I do need to put assembly lube on the end that's the closest to us, and then we got the whole rocker arm assembly ready to go on. So the comp cam shaft does utilize the OEM bottom part, and basically all I did was stick the ARP bolts that came with the kit through the shaft into the bottom OEM part, and we're basically just going to sit this onto the cylinder head and start tightening them down. Like I said, finger tight, nothing torqued to spec. And we're just going to rotate the motor over and tighten these down one by one. Oh, and also, make sure you put engine assembly lube on the top of the springs, as well as the top of the push rods. You can see we got the driver's side, rocker arms, push rods, all that stuff assembled and tightened down, like I said. Before we button up the valve covers and all that, I actually am going to do one more thing. And that is, I'm going to put a little bit of motor oil on the top of the motor, because comp cam specifically said they want motor oil poured on top of the rockers before you start it up. Well, honestly, once we start getting fuel rails, the blower, and everything else in here, we're not going to have another opportunity to pour any oil on top of the motor through the valve covers, because like I said, there's simply way too much stuff in the way. So we're going to be using this Driven or Joe Gibbs Racing, whatever brand, break-in motor oil. It's just 5W30, it's their BR30. And basically we're going to use this during this initial startup tune, you know, because I've got a couple tunes from PCM to flash to this thing. And yeah, once we get the engine fired up, put a little bit of miles on it, then we go get it chassis dynoed. You know, we're going to use this. But I think before we do go to the dyno, I will change this out. I will also probably change out the spark plugs. I did order a new set. So I think for the initial break-in, we're going to use the old set of spark plugs. I did buy 10 instead of 8. So the one spark plug that was damaged by the piston exploding, I will be replacing that obviously. And we'll still have 9 more to swap in before our dyno date. So let's go ahead and get some fresh motor oil poured over the rockers, and we'll button this thing up. Alright guys, we've made a bunch more progress, actually a lot more than I thought we were going to. So if you guys can see, I have the entire front engine accessory drive installed. We got the alternator, the water pump, the power steering pump, supercharger tensioner, the belt for the alternator, the air conditioner, and you know, it goes around the inside of the harmonic balancer. That's been installed. I mocked up the coolant hoses for the motor side. I haven't done the blower side yet, obviously, but yeah, the hoses are all in place. So yeah, we have made a ton of progress, and actually, it's still early enough. I think we're gonna go grab the blower and put that on next. Alright guys, you'll see behind us we have made huge updates. So we have the supercharger in, we got the lid installed, I got the fuel system installed. Actually it's just kind of mocked up, but we got the fuel rail tightened down, the fuel pressure regulator, I got all the lines run over there. I do need to tighten all that stuff down obviously. And then on top of here you guys can see a different set of pulleys. What I'm going to do, I'm going to replace the passenger side pulley over here with this ATI unit. I already had this pulley from the Edelbrock Supercharger, so that is the same size as the factory idler pulley over here on the passenger side. This driver's side is actually a 100 millimeter. We're going to step up with a bigger pulley there, and then we're also going to downsize to a 2.75 inch Grip Tech pulley. I actually picked this up from Vengeance Racing. They had it on their used parts eBay sale, and you guys can say it does say Kong Performance TVS 2650. So with the built bottom end, that's why we're gonna go with that smaller pulley, because I'm not afraid of blowing up the stock pistons and all that like I was with the previous motor. So like I said, now that we've got the built bottom end, we're gonna lean on it just a little bit harder, because I think that other pulley was a 3.25 inch or 3.2 inch, something like that, and that's a 2.75. So it should make a little bit more power, and hopefully meets our power goals. So yeah, I think these all torque down. The two idler pulleys, I think those torque down to 37 foot-pounds. And then the Grip Tech, I forget what the torque is at. It's like 8 foot-pounds. It's really low. So get the pulleys installed and we'll be ready to go. It's been a few days since our last update, but as you guys can see, the Corvette is looking back together a little bit better. You'll notice I have the Supercharger pulley installed. Everything's torqued. We got all of the ATI pulleys swapped over, so the 73 or 76 millimeter on the passenger side and the 100 mil over on the driver's side. Got the belt installed. We got the AC belt installed. And down here, you notice we have the suspension back installed. Yes, the sway bar is still hanging down, but I spent the last couple days putting the suspension on, getting everything torqued down, lined up, and especially getting the motor mounts lined up. When I had previously used the previous set of engine mounts, they were a little bit taller. They weren't wanting to line up. So when I got the subframe back up, I did the rear bolts first because those were the easiest to get to. Then I did the front, got the fronts tight, but then I noticed that the top of the Supercharger was pinned against the top of the firewall, or the cover right there. So how I ended up getting that to slide back down was undoing the rear bolts and then kind of lowering the engine down, raising the subframe up, and just that kind of wiggle room managed to get the engine mount holes right into the subframe. Put the motor mount bolts on, put those rear bolts on for the subframe, and that got us all lined up down there. Then we just did the front suspension, nothing too crazy there. And yeah, oh, and the other update, you'll notice that I have the return line out. And that is out because this is one of those, while you're in there, you might as well modify it opportunities. So that line is from A&A Superchargers, and they did the whole fuel system. When I moved the flex fuel sensor, you guys will remember, it used to sit right here between the feed line and the fuel rails going into the back of the Supercharger. So I actually moved that down below here. You guys can't see it, but it's actually below. Actually, it's right there. If you guys can see that, that's the sensor right there. That made the return line about 3 inches too long. When I ran it back through the torque tube, unfortunately, it was all bound up, and I didn't want that line sitting either above the torque tube or below the torque tube in case anything ever happened. I wanted it sitting, attached to the side of the car. And yeah, so what you guys will see, the end of this 2-inch paint line, that's going to be actually where the new fitting goes. That ended up being 103 inches. So what I did was, the bulkhead fitting on the back of the car, you guys can't see it. The bulkhead ECS fitting, it's actually -8. The line that comes from ECS is actually a -6, so I actually had a reducer on there. And so just to reduce the amount of adapters, 15-degree fittings, and just makes things simpler, I just ended up going with a 90-degree fitting on both ends of that fuel line, and it's all -8. So it's -8 at the back, it'll be -8 up the front. So what I'm gonna have to do is replace the quick connector that goes to, I think it's 3/8. Instead of having a -6 on there, we're gonna upgrade that to a -8. So it'll be -8 from the E85 sensor all the way back. And yes, that's pretty much how this new setup is gonna go. It's gonna be all -8. There's no reducers, nothing crazy like that. So it doesn't look like we did much, but we actually have everything below the cylinder heads done. Plugged in, screwed in, bolted. Everything's torqued down. The suspension, the sway bar, I just did finish that up. The sway bar, the ABS brake lines, all the stuff down there on the subframe, that's all been tied up. Just did get the power steering pump tightened down. Guys, this is kind of a pain to get to, but basically the best way I found to get the hard line going into the bottom of the power steering pump is go from underneath, because you do have room while you still have the steering column disconnected and we still don't have the driver's side header in. With all those two things not being there, you got plenty of room to go up. Oh, and guys, that is a 17 millimeter. Kind of a hard lesson to learn. 17 millimeter, I took a crow's foot, tightened it down, took that crow's foot and then put it on a ratchet wrench, and then just slowly tightened that down and got everything tight. So, got one more project that's under the car that we need to do, and that is in this box right here. This is from DEI. This is part number 50531. And what is in here is a heat shield product from DEI. This kit is actually only the transmission tunnel sides itself, so it's basically it's a reflective adhesive backed material that we're going to put on there. I already have a Elite Engineering torque tunnel plate, and that's thicker than stock, and it already has a reflective shield on it. I saw this out there. I'll be honest, guys, I don't remember how much I paid for this, but it wasn't that super expensive. And yeah, so while we're in there, we might as well get this installed as well. So this shouldn't take too much time. I think all we gotta do is degrease the side of the car with, you know, brake cleaner and rags. And then basically all we gotta do is put this adhesive backed material on there. Now, like I said, they're showing the torque plate. We don't have to do that. We just have to do the sides. And yeah, you just basically apply it. There's a roller that comes with this. And yeah, so I think we just stick it on and be done. All right, guys, I apologize if the lighting sucks, but we're under the car in a dark shop, so I think you guys can see this. And so the heat protection material not only goes over the OEM heat shields, but it goes down the trans tunnel and down around the corner, actually past the torque tube tamer that we have in the back. So yeah, that's basically your install. You know, they call you to clean it with brake cleaner, wipe it down with a rag, and then go ahead and install it. Now, I will say this, there are two slotted pieces. Those are the front pieces. They both go upwards. I actually mocked up each piece in place. So what I did was I took the material, I left the glue protective film on the back of it. I basically just pressed it against each panel, and that got us our basic outline. So you guys can see there's the slit piece right there. There's a slit piece over on the driver's side. And what I did was that slit piece I folded down, and then once we got everything tight and got the back of the heat shield to fold underneath that, then I pressed it down, and then I used the roller. As you guys can see, there are definitely roller marks on all of the pieces. So yeah, that is pretty much the DEI heat shield. All right, guys, we've made a lot of progress today. You can see that the passenger side has been fully assembled. So coil packs, spark plug wires, the alternator, all the ground straps. The alternator's plugged in. I did get the AC compressor plugged in, and I had forgotten to plug that in. So everything's done down here. Sway bar's back installed. As you guys just saw, we did do the heat shielding for around the exhaust. And yeah, I think we are 100% done with this side of the motor, at least electronically. All right, guys, that Dash 8 fitting came in. As you guys can see, I actually removed the whole fuel pressure regulator from the car as an assembly. It's just easier to work on. There's one 15 millimeter bolt right here. It just ties it to the brake master cylinder. And yeah, so you just take that bolt off, pull this out, and it gave us plenty of room to work on this Dash 8 fitting right here. So you guys can see it's Dash 6 up here and it's Dash 8 down here. So that'll give us plenty of room to get this hose in the car and get this whole process started. So I actually have the back of the tank still draining because I had to take off both fittings off the ECS bulkhead. I couldn't get to the top one. There just wasn't the proper room. So we'll get the top line replaced with that hose from Brown & Miller. We'll get that ran. We'll get this hooked up, and we'll be finished with the fuel on this project. All right, guys, if you see that top hose, that is actually the return line coming from the front. So that has been fully installed. Ran it down the torque tube. You guys can see the exhaust is all in place. And yeah, everything is good to go with the new return line. The torque tube plate is back in, and the exhaust is back in. All right, guys, you might be wondering why half the motor's torn apart. Well, one of you viewers, I'll put your name down below, you were very astute when I was assembling the motor, putting the lifters and everything in. You noticed that, if you guys can see, the gasket right there says front. That is the front of the motor. And I really have to thank the viewer that noticed this, because honestly, guys, it's just not something I would have seen. So for the last couple hours, you can probably see it over there, we got the blower, the cylinder head, the lid, everything's torn apart over there. And yeah, so basically what we're doing is ripping off this brand new LS9 head gasket, which kind of sucks, and we're gonna be throwing it out. And what this will lead to is cooling issues, because the coolant passages right here, particularly these two holes, don't exist on the front of the motor. And yeah, you'd be having coolant going to jackets that don't exist, and you have just pockets where no coolant is. So, all right guys, if you can see, we do have the new LS9 head gasket installed, and it does say front. So this is put in the right way this time. So it looks like we're back to where we were a few days ago, but honestly guys, I've actually spent the last 9 hours out here getting the cylinder head. Everything was torqued last night, but putting in the push rods, the rocker arms, the valve cover, putting all the electronics on. You guys could see I wrapped up all of the electronics and everything on this side. You see the superchargers back in. Obviously we got the belt, the pulleys, all that stuff's back on. And over here on the driver's side, pretty much the same ordeal. You know, we got the fuel lines all hooked up. We got all the sensors, all the wiring. The header's back in. I think you guys can see that back there. So the exhaust is back in, and I did hook it up down below. And one more thing, I kind of want to show you guys that the engine is spinning over without issue. You know, the belt's spinning, the oil pump's spinning. And yeah, this thing's moving with super ease. I have put 5.5 quarts of oil in it, and I also filled up the power steering fluid reservoir. So should be good. Like I said, all we gotta do is put some coolant in here and finish up this throttle body and intake and all the coolant lines. And so yeah, that is gonna be the wrap up of getting everything back in the car, everything reassembled, and almost ready to fire this thing up. We are waiting on one thing, that is a fuel line. I also need to flash the PCM, so I'm gonna do that probably in a separate video. Then we're actually ready to fire this thing up. We'll bring you guys along and do a feature episode on that. So also, big shout out to the guy that solved the whole head gasket issue. Honestly, I forgot the name. I'll include it down below again. Thanks again, because you really saved my bacon, because I would have never even seen that, and that would have been super hard and difficult to try to diagnose why the engine's overheating yet it's only one side. So thanks again for that. And yeah, so if you guys like this video, hit that like button. If you guys want to see that fire up video that I just talked about, hit that subscribe button, turn on your bell notifications. If you guys want to help support the channel, I'll try to include links for all the tools and parts and sensors and everything that we've used today, especially that LS9 head gasket. I wasn't really planning on replacing that, but we'll include all those links down below. And also make sure you check out our website, BonecrrusherSS.com. Any support you guys can give right there comes back and relate the channel, the motor, and when we have screw-ups like a head gasket. So if you guys could help out, that'd be appreciated. So thanks guys, have a great one.